Warning.
This is Off-Planet Radio.
Be those predictors.
The first people by Seamus Wiles.
They made the ultimate discovery, a mechanism containing both the power to create and to destroy.
This machine is dangerous.
When we put the word out that we were looking for copies of the book, we found out we weren't the only ones.
Who?
William Bell.
All right, this will be Eye of the Needle number 3 formally. Actually, the last podcast episode was titled 2.1. So what happened there is that I did the I did a full episode with Freeman in December, the last show of the year. And the second hour, that was an expose of Eye of the Needle for Freeman's audience. And then we did the 12/21 Solstice show, which was an expanded version of Eye of the Needle. And so we sort of filled in a lot of gaps there. I'm not good at titling things. And I mean, to this day, I have no idea how many shows I've actually done of anything. So we'll call this episode 3 for the sake of moving forward, because otherwise my OCD will kick in, I'll drive myself insane, and we'll never get another podcast again, because, well, that's what happens. So this is kind of off the cuff, free form, no notes, no outline. There's another show in the shoot right now that's information density. But it also requires putting together a lot of the elements of it to kind of make it work together. So because I wanted to get this out, and because this is going to be stream of consciousness, I'm just going to record it and let it drop. So welcome to all of you who are listening. Thanks to you on Patreon who make this possible, who have provided the support. And this work is for you first. This one may leak out to the world. We may put this on YouTube. So the thought stream that hit me over the last few days somewhat stems from comments I saw on Twitter and other places about what happens when the cabal is taken down. And see, right away we're into a difficult situation, because most people's understanding of what this world order is limited by your capacity to understand how things function inside of a much bigger machine. So the world order itself is actually a world's order. It's multiple worlds. It's functioning simultaneously on many worlds plus other dimensions. And this is where it gets tricky to define things. This is why I, by the way, don't abandon what I learned in the years that I spent in studying Christianity and specifically the Bible, because there's a tremendous amount of information, however redacted, diluted it is, on this element of spiritual warfare. And it is very distinct in talking about the fact that this is a war of worlds, that Ephesians 6 in the New Testament talks about powers and principalities and thrones and orders and layers of powers that sit in a hierarchy system. And as you know, nobody hates linearity and hierarchy more than me, but that is the way things are set up. It's not only a hierarchy, it's a compartmentalized hierarchy. And it's compartmentalized on worlds, and it's compartmentalized dimensionally. And in many cases, these worlds are functioning in parallel with our own world, interdimensionally. And so what happens if, for instance, the new world order, that being the order that you believe you understand exists around us that controls this world system, were to collapse? And I think it's worth noting that, first off, even if you bankrupt these people, quite honestly, they don't rely on money the way we do. They don't rely on finances and economic systems. They created these systems as containment points for our energetic systems. The fact that you think that the World Bank and all of these different financial structures operate to maintain the world system, you see, that's part of the illusion as well. All of the economic systems are designed to largely keep its participants inside of the system in whatever format they're using at the time, and it's varied over millennia. I mean, the world financial system is as old as the ancient kingdoms of conquest. It's always been that way. And of course, the minute I start to record, planes start to fly over. There'll be trains eventually, and probably sirens in the background, even though I live near a hospital. And probably a helicopter. That would be next. Yeah. Time to go back to the underground studio, I guess. The way this all functions, again, in this hierarchical system, isn't reliant on the people at the bottom of the food chain. We are exactly that. We are a medium by which they function energetically. We basically operate in an incarnational system, where we basically come in amnesiac, so to speak, and then we begin to function on this world system in a scale that enables us to have what we consider to be our 3D life. So there's a whole lot of things in play here, because you are obviously an eternal being. And on some level or another, permissibly, we've agreed to come into this system. We've agreed to be here. It's an overlapping, interconnected, interconsensual system where even the dark side, to some degree or another, is operating in concert with us. We're not victims. We're not helpless. But what we are is we're somewhat powerless on the scale where we're able to orchestrate wide stream operations that would either impact them in any meaningful way or take them down. And because they operate on the scale of worlds, and because at this present time we are limited to the scale of being basically stuck on the ground, walking around on 2 feet, maybe they give you a car, you get to fly in a plane every once in a while, but you don't really have a bird's eye view, even from the Earth standpoint, of exactly how the system runs. And so when we begin to talk about things like the idea that we can bankrupt their system, or we can control their finances, that we can bring them down militarily, even from the most basic level of understanding their military capabilities, you do understand that any firearms that we hold may keep the government's tanks off of our backyard for a while. That's it. Because they have weapons so far advanced that they can basically take out entire city blocks with the punch of a button. So the illusion of control, the idea that the Second Amendment somehow protects us, the idea that these guns, this thing down in Virginia right now fighting against the Virginia governor, who basically wants to take everybody's firearms away from them, and then Trump turning around and putting it on his platform on the Trump website that he would like to see universal open carry by all citizens. This is the interesting dichotomy. While I support the concept of possession of firearms of any type, I don't think they're an answer. I do think they may keep the common criminal away from you, but they will never be the means by which we, quote, take control back of our system, because it's not our system. And that's the first tick mark on this entire list. It is not our system. And so over the last few months, I've sort of started to distance myself away from politically motivated, financially motivated, social activism motivated takeovers, only to the standpoint that we can make everyday life a little bit more habitable for the average person. And I think that's useful. But we're not going to bankrupt our system. We're not militarily going to take them down. Are there white hats inside of the military, inside of the government? Absolutely. And there are people that hold the balance between power. But the illusion that we're going to take down their system is something we have to get over, because this is not where this is going. And this is not the most pleasant message I will deliver as part of the Eye of the Needle series, because it's a sobering reality that we need to deal with, that in the physical expression of our beingness, we do not have the ability to take back a position of dominance in this world. In fact, it's the opposite of that. What we are looking at now is the ability to move through the consciousness stream of this world and begin to develop strategies that enable us to work in parallel in a world that's still dominated by forces of darkness. So I want to go back for a minute and just kind of revisit the concept of this multi-world system. This kind of goes into the whole original thread of this show, why we picked up a conversation called The Eye of the Needle, predicated, on this book by David Griffin. And what I think was attempting to be communicated by David Griffin in the book, that book really does break out exactly what is going on. Yes, there has been a long, eons-on war between factions for control of humanity on this world and on other worlds as well. Let me explain worlds a little bit, because sometimes people get concepts in their head that are visuals, and there's a huge amount of mind control in understanding how worlds work. I'm not talking about these spinning balls that they show you pictures of out in so-called space. I'm not talking about the Galactic Federation of Light or the Universal Protection Unit or any of the other facades that are put out for you to try and give you a mental picture of a non-existent structure of a galactic enterprise. When I talk about worlds, I'm talking about worlds that exist within slices of space-time. And the access to these worlds, as we've talked about on the show for a long time, have more to do with going through deep space water than through any actual portals going vertically upward and outward. So when you understand that you are interdimensionally woven into a multi-world matrix, that this world is conjoined with other worlds and other dimensions, and how this all functions on the spiritual level. Because by proxy, this also means, and this is where we can at least lift the conversation a little bit, it also means that you are vibrationally and intrinsically linked to that same system of multi-worlds and multi-dimensions. That's the good news. And that actually is where we can begin to impact the system. In fact, we can begin to sidestep the system. Because the system itself believes that it is controlling this world ontological sweep. It believes that it has the ability to orchestrate massive changes and to impact the soul level metric of billions and billions of souls. And the bad news for them is that they've never been in control. They've simply only seemed to be in control because of the occulting of the human mind, which was basically entrained into a three-dimensional single consciousness focus. I mean, think about this for a minute. Consciousness itself is not limited to the single focus world/life that you live every day. You know this because of your dream world. And if you don't know this because of your dream world, you have to learn to dream better. And you have to learn to begin to connect spiritually to your own inner core and understand the depth of infinity that goes into your own consciousness. This is where meditative practices, prayer, and the ability to be able to inhabit your own being without outside interference for even short periods of time is so crucial. Because everything around us is externalized. It's noise. It's high signal to noise ratio. There's a lot of pink noise, a lot of white noise. Pump up the jams. I mean, basically, what they want to do is keep that buzz in your head. Even down to the ringing in the ears that's now so prevalent among everybody. This whole concept of the tinnitus thing. Some of that may in fact actually be an indicator of what we would call an ascension, because frequencies are shifting on this world and inside of our bodies, and the constant shift back and forth is creating some phasing that's going on within our own hearing. We get the same thing with our vision now. The matrix itself has begun to break down to a fairly aggressive point if you stop to think about it. I mean, look at this whole Tartaria mud flood thing. Look what people are showing you on YouTube. Look what you're being shown in visuals and old historical photographs. So let's talk about this for a minute, because this goes into the whole concept of what we call the resets. I've been talking about the organic reset for about 2 years. And the term reset now shows up in the Tartaria mud flood information wave as basically civilizations that were taken down at the height of their dominance. Civilizations that had high technology with very extremely high skills of being able to construct very elaborate, almost beyond human capacity, architecture and artwork, and the vestiges of an energy distribution that looks remarkably like something that Tesla talked about. So what are these? Are these the vestiges of a civilization that we, quote, may have had even as early as 250 years ago, somewhere back in the mid-1800s? Are they older? Are they newer? Do we really have a sense of time about any of this, really? I mean, what is your sense of time now? Your sense of time largely is limited to the time that you've spent on this world, and a little bit behind that because of the fact that you knew people who were older than you. You had parents and grandparents, and hopefully you talked to them. You know, everybody, I hope, when they were young, talked to their grandparents. I was fortunate enough for a brief time to have even coexisted with my great-grandmothers. These people left us a legacy of at least memories about some part of our recent history. But beyond that, what do we really know about time? And what do we really know about how time itself is manipulated? More importantly, what do we know about the distortions that occur when these worlds are interacting? What if, just what if, all these vestigial appearances of buildings and these discoveries that we're having about these artifacts and remnants and very strange structures that appear to dot the face of this world. Notice I caught myself, I didn't say planet. That dot the face of this world. What if those are appearing and emerging now to show us something? I mean, seriously, think about this. Because human consciousness, when it begins to focus on something, has the remarkable ability to break down dimensional walls. So what if Tartaria and Mudflood maybe aren't so much a reset on the scale of civilizations, but a reset on the level of consciousness? That, in fact, even within the sweep of our own recent history of the last few hundred years, these civilizations conjoined to us dimensionally and in terms of temporal space are now emerging into this space as these worlds begin to move closer together. Because when you begin to look at them, they don't make a lot of sense from the standpoint of our reality or what we know about our reality. But what do we really know about our reality? What do we know about how people actually function who live in a parallel dimension? And I really want you to grapple with that concept, because I have. I've grappled with this concept for decades, because I know it's real, because I've seen it. And I've sensed it. And I've been there in remote viewing, and I've been there in dreams. And other people have too. Many of the people that I've talked to over the years, if not publicly, at least privately, have allowed that there are moments when they knew they were not in the same dimensional space-time that they normally occupied. There is sort of this liminality that exists when you begin to enter into a different consciousness. And so when I look at this whole presentation of Tartaria and mud floods, and the mud flood thing, let's just put that down right now. Mud flood sort of indicates like maybe that great flood, the whole Noah's Ark thing, which is interesting, but I think that's been historically colored as well. But wow, I mean, would that really account for things? I mean, what would it take to flood an entire world, especially if the world's a ball? Now, if it's a bowl, concave Earth, that's another interesting concept. If it's flat, that's another interesting concept. But you don't need to go there. From our standpoint, this world is not flat, it's not round, and yet it's both, because of the way it is constrained by the energy systems that form it and maintain its perceptual space. The arguments in favor of flat Earth were largely that visually, and even in terms of measurement, you could never validate the proper curvature of the Earth on a per mile or per 100 or per 1,000 mile basis. The fact that you can see for hundreds of miles, for instance, to Lake Michigan from somewhere in upstate New York on a high vista, sort of tells you that curvature thing ain't working out too well. And there's a lot of anomalies about the ball Earth theory that don't hold place, including, the very convenient measurements that go into spatialization of sun, moon, and celestial bodies. And that's a conversation we'll have probably in the next show, because I'm going to break that out a little bit more. But just to break the hypnosis, the spell that we're under about this world. Let's just leave it that we exist on a plane, that we exist inside of a construct, and that construct itself is formulated in energy, and that form itself is relative to other worlds, but other worlds, let's just say, not quite like what is presented in that ridiculous floating ball thing that they used to show you in middle school. So we put that aside for a minute, and we just do a thought exercise. We begin to understand that dimensionally, and in terms of temporality, and in sense of consciousness, we have the ability to move between worlds. No different than the so-called Cabal, Illuminati, New World Order, rulers and principalities and princes and gods and rulers in high places. No difference. We are fractalized aspects of universe, creator, God, however you want to term that. So the concept that this ruling elite on this world are somehow omnipotent kind of gets put to the lie, because we know that some people slip through the net from time to time. When we call them yogis, avatars, messiahs, the Christ, the Buddha, the Krishna. We have holy books, the Bhagavad Gita, the sutras. All of these books tell you things about the dimensional aspects, not just of the worlds themselves, but of the beings who inhabit them. I mean, you have the sutras and the Vedas, and they're talking about these flying Vimana machines. You look at the pyramids and you wonder who the hell constructed that. You look at these vestiges of the so-called Tartaria civilizations, and you sort of wonder who or how constructed that. What type of construction process enables the type of elaborate detail that we see formed in what seems to be marble? And my concept for that, my answer to that, is that in some alternative reality, or some version of ourselves, or some segment of our prior history, we didn't build things, we formed them from monolithic materials through a type of process that maybe we understand today roughly, sort of like 3D printing, or the milling of monolithic material using light energy, or some other form of energy that we don't completely understand. That the conveyance of energy through the air is not some exotic technology. This was what Tesla talked about. It's what Tesla proved. That was the technology that was stolen and taken over because of the deals that were made between Westinghouse and Edison to basically run these power lines around us as a containment grid. You thought, and here's an interesting thing. This is where we thought we were getting something, and you talk about taking your power back. You do understand that given what we know about what Tesla had, it was never necessary to run power lines. The electrification that was done of the world was done to put these high voltage power grids around us as a containment field. Think of this like a cattle fence. And I'm sorry, because it's an unflattering comparison. Nobody wants to think about it this way. But just the fact that they made such a high initiative to do this, first, obviously, in the very cosmopolitan places, in the major cities. And there's these weird artifacts where, like, they would build amusement parks at the end of a pier, like Coney Island. At the end of a trolley line, it was almost like they needed to get us entrained into using this new novelty called electricity while they built the wires around us. And we always have to look and think somewhat in reverse of normal perception, because normal perception is entrained perception. And it goes into why we cannot take this thing down in the way that people are talking about, whether it's through military actions, financial systems, so-called white hats, leaders, rulers inside of government who are insurgents, whatever it is that you fantasize that somehow will enable us to take this system down, will not enable us to do that in that manner because it's their system. When we begin to understand that ultimately their system is based on a form of materialism, it's based on a type of control that can only have access to you because perceptually you have limited your consciousness inside of this matrix, while at the same time there are multiple conjoined worlds around you, including one that sits outside of you, where there's a part of you that still exists outside of the system. This is the concept of the oversoul, the aggregation of multiple consciousnesses which cannot express inside of the human body. I mean, think about the incredible amount of power of the human brain. The human brain is a dynamo. It's an electrical conductor. It is a transforming system. It is a receiving system. It is a processor, much like the processor inside of your computer. But what it is not your mind. Your mind is external to that brain. And in fact, one of the things that one gains from doing deep sustained meditation is to begin to locate the center of your being. If you've never done that, I advise you to begin to meditate. And when you meditate, go into a state, do your breaths, and then begin to try and locate where the center of your being is, not your body. And it's like that existentially in terms of these worlds. This is not the center. This is an outlier in one sense, in terms of how it functions in relationship to other worlds. It is both 10 trillion light years away, and at the same time, if you turn your head a certain direction, you can see the video screen flicker. Because for a brief moment, you can see around the other side of the prismatic wall. Sounds insane. So when I talk about the fact that we can't bring them down according to their game, again, we understand that this is a highly compartmentalized operation. Everything that you see around you in terms of a control system, from your governments, your police, your military, your financial structures, the structures that give you your entertainment, your entrainment, these are all minions of successively larger circles of influence. It's kind of like what John Lennon wrote about. It's looking through a glass onion. You keep looking through layers and layers and layers. And then that doesn't sound like an empowering situation at all. It can demoralize you very quickly because you're still looking at the externality of the whole thing. The point of consciousness and a spiritual discipline, however humble it may be, because believe me, once you begin to devote yourself to any of this, you will be rewarded 1,000 times. Can't stress that enough. This is a spiritual war. This is spiritual warfare. We do not battle against the flesh, the blood, the metal, the plastic, the chemtrails, the high energy directed weapon beams, the fires, earthquakes, floods, famines, and all the other side effects of their continual war on humanity. There is a consciousness war that sits over top of all of this that enables them to continue to fuel their system through the power of your consciousness being limited to one-dimensional thought and one-dimensional function. Understand that however well-meaning, the methodologies that are mostly proposed still operate at ground zero level in terms of how it could possibly impact this parasitic system. Again, we're dealing with not a world system, but a world's system. A system of conjoined worlds and dimensions that they are able to navigate. And they are able to navigate it using hardware, because that's what they know. When I talk about off-world operations, and it's something that doesn't come up often because all the stories out there are so distorted. I mean, the whole fantasy behind, God, I hate to bring it up, Corey Good and the Blue Avians and the 20 years in back programs and the secret space program. You know, there is a kernel of truth in all of that. But it's not what he was talking about, because it's a cult. The minute he began talking about that, he had to bring in religious imagery. Why? Because he can't explain what I am explaining to you in this podcast, what I've just told you. The paymasters that sit behind the scenes that provide you with this type of entertainment don't want this out. So the secret space program, is there a truth to that? Yes, of course there is. Highly compartmentalized operations that have been ongoing for hundreds of years, not 70. This is part of the enterprise that they performed, that you see play acted in everything from the Pirates of Penzance to all of the space opera films that have come out, everything from Star Trek to Star Wars, including the current fantasy of this, quote, Space Force that they're now launching. I mean, these are all shadows of reality. You know, the entire sci-fi fantasy. I mean, I ate this up when I was a kid. I loved it. I still love it. We all love a space opera. But at the end of the day, that space opera was built for you on a soundstage that included giving you these visions of spinning worlds and galactically strewn. I can't even describe it. I mean, they give you a vision of something that doesn't exist, except in the CGI footage that NASA continually dumps into the media, because NASA itself is an entertainment company. Just like To the Stars, this group, the TTSA, To the Stars Academy, Tom DeLonge and the spooks from Lockheed Martin and CIA, Chris Mellon and Louis Elizondo. I mean, that's all space opera too. As insincere as they seem, it's a psyop. It's another intelligence operation. It's part of the aviary operation. They keep giving you more and more inducements to buy into their system, including the inducements that there will be disclosure. Well, guess what? The motto of the show, beginning 10 years ago, was disclosure is now the truth is inside you, because there are a hell of a lot of people out there that already have their disclosures, some of them since they were children. So the whole space opera just kind of goes out the window at some point, doesn't it? I mean, the fact that we know that there's off-world beings here shouldn't even be a shock at this point. There are tens of millions of people on this world right now that have seen the craft, they've experienced the beings, they've had the distortions in their reality as a result of interacting with something that's clearly not part of everyday vista of reality on this world. So what you call the secret space program, what's been sold to you, is a comic book version of something that's very real. Materially, these beings, these strata, these levels of this ruling elite run a very large enterprise between worlds. They've known how to do this. And in some ways, they've alluded to this fact in fictional narratives and religious imagery for thousands of years. Look at all the imagery behind water. Look at the fables and the stories of the mer people and the legends of Pluto and the legends that go into what goes on under the water, even that legend of Atlantis and the fact that possibly Atlantis existed in a subaquatic system after it allegedly collapsed. So your secret space program exists under the water and deep inside the earth, but it also operates interdimensionally because those are the portals. And what these corporations do, the front end operations for the old McDonnell Douglas and Boeing and Lockheed Martin, the defense contract industry. Those are all front operations for something. They run serious for-profit off-world operations. I mean, they're doing everything from mining, manufacturing, they run cloning projects. God, they're farming extinct species. They do environmental and time control systems. Some of these edifices you see from the so-called Tartaria, what if those things were milled off-world and dropped on? What if the pyramids weren't even made on Earth? I mean, think about this seriously for a moment. What kind of slave labor do you need to build these type of structures? But if you were building them in an off-world environment where, let's just say, density wasn't such a problem, or materials behaved very differently, would we not say that that would make for a very lucrative enterprise? I mean, just the concept that they function in a multi-world operation and that they do this for profit. I talked about this on Twitter today, the missing trillions of dollars that Catherine Austin Fitts discovered in her tenure in the was it the Bush administration, I guess. I mean, she went through hell for years over that, but really what she saw was one set of books. She saw the set of books with the red ink. What she didn't see was the other side of the ledger, which probably is, encrypted on computers networked into the defense contractors through the various defense agencies and via the Pentagon. I mean, the 9/11 hit on the Pentagon was all about the forensic accounting that was going to occur or was occurring as a result of the announcement that Donald Rumsfeld made on September 10th, 2001, which was all of this missing money from the Pentagon. And why did they do that? The reason they did it was to basically do a misdirection, to point you in one direction so that you didn't look in a direction that showed you that these guys had racked up a shitload of money beyond what you can calculate. I mean, trillions, how many zeros do we want to trail behind a set of numbers before it all just becomes unreal? And that's the point of it. These are materialists. These are people who have calculated things in ways that we don't completely understand because our minds don't work this way. The average person given $1 million, well, we know what happens there because we watch people win lotteries. It ruins their lives because most people can't handle the amount of energy that comes in as a result of that type of monetary windfall. And so we're not going to win this thing by force or by so-called commandeering the systems. Because, well, you say the systems are corrupt themselves. No, the concept of the systems are corrupt. The systems themselves were designed to be a containment field for something much higher. And I'm not getting overly spiritual here to the point of not being practical. because there are ways we navigate through this. We power through this system, and there are energies coming in that are very much working with us in concert with our own energies, our own intentions, our own vibrations. These things have been going on since the 60s, and they have been kicked down and suppressed, but they're irrepressible anymore. And so we have to discover where our spiritual center is, and then we have to understand that the materialist weighted system that they operate under not only can't be commandeered, we don't want it. But what we can do is begin to pragmatically work in parallel, each day, moment by moment, energetically, in contemplation of outcomes that benefit humanity, and in ways that can materially impact the immediate well-being of well-meaning human beings, but not in the sense of commandeering the system to take it over and then, quote, fix it, because you can't fix this. You can't fix stupid. This is materialist thought, and materialist thought cannot yield a spiritual outcome. And so if you even just look at what happened a little over a week ago with the Pluto-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn, and what that's ushering in right now in terms of a cycle that's going to run for the next 9 months, which will take us into the election here in the U.S. And these are synodic cycles, so they're somewhat predictable. And then it runs out another 38-year cycle, a long wave cycle. And the more I'm looking at this, and this is what I will break out in probably the next show, is I'm looking at this more and more like you would look at predicting outcomes plotted in probably a Gantt chart in a spreadsheet. Because once you have predictable cycles in time, you have the ability to begin mapping outcomes from the standpoint of consciousness. Because that's what they're doing. That's why they use astrological systems. That's why they use predictive systems. That's why they're pushing AI, because AI enables them to not only control things based on the clock cycles, the tick-tock time, but taking it down to the scale of nanoseconds, milliseconds, and being able to calculate outcomes. This brings us right back to Project Looking Glass and the Probable Futures Database Voice of God software that's talked about in the Revelation book. Now we're down to the nub of the system again. We're not going to win this playing the game the way the game was played before. And so, as we look at this, we have to be a little bit smarter, but more than anything else, this is an intelligence game. This is not a thinking man's operation at all. This comes down to perception and feeling and the ability to open up our consciousness in a way that we're no longer dazzled and entrained by the hypnotics of this system mind control grid that we live in. Because any delusion that says that you are going to take this system back, you're going to take it down, you're going to watch it sputter and fail, it's been running for hundreds of thousands of years, as far as we can tell. If those vestiges of Tartaria tell you anything, this system has no problem treading over its own designs in order to reset a civilization away from the consciousness waves that have come into Earth before. At this time, we don't let it happen. This time, it's the great remembering. This time, we take our power back by bringing our collective memories together, remembering who we are, and then standing in concert with an energy that wants to come in and help us push through this. This game has an end. This cycle has a loop system. Maybe what these vestiges of Tartaria are telling us is that we've now remembered enough that we have some physical evidence that reminds us of who we were before this whole game began. Maybe these are markers that were placed here by us for future us as a way to remember and recall. And that these things are a vision of the magnitude of glory on the physical world that these civilizations achieved. In a time before our energies were so distorted and scattered, and before we were farmed and socialized and put behind the cattle fence and educated into stupid. And maybe the lesson is that the way we take this back is to not only do it better, but to do it completely different. So these are just things to think about right now. Why we can't play this game the way we've been taught to play it before. Now we've got to be smarter. Now we've got to be more spiritual. Now we have to start to look at things from the standpoint of a different map. In fact, a different mapping system. You are a multidimensional being. You have the ability to expand your consciousness onto other dimensions and to literally walk between multiple worlds. That ability is given to you so that you can begin to gather the vision that ultimately just says, you know what? We will sit here and we will watch the sunset of a control grid that constrained us for hundreds of thousands of years. And we will watch you disappear into the void because we no longer believe. This is The Eye of the Needle. I'm Randy Moggins. This is Off Planet Radio. And the truth is out there. It's inside you. Go find it and push it forward.
You are listening to Off Planet Radio at offplanetradio.com. Listening to Off Planet Radio at offplanetradio.com.